The bolt cutters sliced through the chain with a metallic snap that echoed across the parking lot. Diane Whitmore didn't flinch. She stood there in her crisp white tennis outfit, her perfectly highlighted hair catching the afternoon sun, a triumphant smile spreading across her face as the chain fell to the pavement. "Finally," she muttered, reaching for the door handle of the black Jeep Wrangler. "Let's see how you like having your property taken." What Diane didn't know was that the body camera on the officer's vest across the street was recording everything. And that this Jeep wasn't just any vehicle. It was evidence. Federal evidence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all started, 3 weeks earlier, in the Riverside Meadows HOA community meeting. Riverside Meadows was one of those picture-perfect suburban communities where every lawn was exactly 2 inches tall, every mailbox matched, and every resident knew that beige was the only acceptable fence color. The HOA ruled with an iron fist, and that fist belonged to Diane Whitmore. For 6 years, Diane had been the HOA president, and she wore that title like a crown. She was a woman in her mid-50s who had never worked a day in her life after marrying into money, and she'd found her calling in making everyone else's life miserable through petty regulations and power trips. The community center was packed that Tuesday evening. 47 residents sat in folding chairs, most of them just wanting to get through the meeting and get home to their families. But Diane lived for these moments. "Next on the agenda," Diane announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "we have a very serious matter to discuss. Parking violations." A collective groan rippled through the room. "I'm specifically talking about Unit 247, Diane continued, her eyes narrowing. "The residents of—" She paused dramatically, looking down at her papers. "Terrence Bishop." In the back row, Terrence shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was 32 years old, a decorated Army veteran who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before returning home to become a detective with the Metro Police Department. He'd bought his townhouse in Riverside Meadows just 8 months ago, drawn by the good schools in the area. His 7-year-old daughter, Zoe, would be starting 2nd grade in the fall. Terrence was a quiet guy, kept to himself mostly, always polite when he saw neighbors. He didn't want trouble. He just wanted a safe place for his daughter to grow up. "Mr. Bishop has been parking his vehicle," Diane said the word like it was poison, "in guest parking spot number 12 for the past 2 weeks. "It's been 3 days, Terrence said calmly, standing up. "And I left a note on my door explaining why. My garage door motor broke, and the replacement part is on backorder. I'm waiting for—" "The HOA bylaws are very clear," Diane interrupted, holding up her hand like she was stopping traffic. "Guest parking is for guests. For a maximum of 48 hours. You are in violation." "With all due respect, Mrs. Whitmore, I explained the situation. I even emailed the HOA board. The part should be here by Friday and—" "Rules are rules, Mr. Bishop." Diane's smile was cold. "Perhaps if you had purchased a more appropriate vehicle, one that actually fits in the garage, we wouldn't be having this problem." The room went quiet. Everyone knew what she really meant. Terrence's Jeep Wrangler was lifted, with off-road tires and a roof rack. He used it for weekend camping trips with Zoe. It fit in his garage just fine when the door worked. "The vehicle fits," Terrence said, his jaw tight. "This is about a broken garage door, not the vehicle." "Nevertheless," Diane continued, "if the vehicle is not moved to your garage by this Friday at 5 p.m., the HOA will have it towed at your expense. Do I make myself clear?" Terrence looked around the room, hoping someone would speak up. A few people avoided his eyes. Others looked sympathetic but said nothing. That's how Diane operated. She'd been doing this for years, nitpicking certain residents until they either fell in line or moved out. "Crystal clear," Terrence said quietly, sitting back down. Diane's smile widened. "Wonderful. Next on the agenda—" The next morning, Terrence woke up at 5:30 a.m., just like he always did. He went for his run, came back, showered, and got Zoe ready for school. After dropping her off with his ex-wife, he headed to the precinct. What Diane Whitmore didn't know, what none of the neighbors knew, was that Terrence wasn't just any detective. For the past 3 months, he'd been on special assignment with a federal task force investigating a major drug trafficking operation that spanned 3 states. The operation was called Iron Pipeline, and it was big. Really big. They were tracking shipments, building cases, and preparing for a coordinated series of raids. The work was intense, and Terrence was often out at all hours, conducting surveillance, meeting with informants, and building the evidence they needed to bring down the entire network. His personal life had taken a back seat. His garage door had broken 10 days ago, and he genuinely hadn't had time to deal with it. Between 12-hour shifts and weekend duty, he'd barely seen Zoe, and calling around for a garage repair company kept falling to the bottom of his priority list. But he'd figured his neighbors would understand. He'd left a note, sent an email. It was temporary. He was wrong. On Wednesday morning, Terrence found the first notice taped to his door. Bright orange paper, impossible to miss. Final warning: vehicle in violation of HOA parking regulations. Must be moved by Friday, April 14th at 5 p.m. or will be subject to towing and fines up to $500. He crumpled the notice and shoved it in his pocket. He didn't have time for this. That day, the task force was planning to execute a major surveillance operation on a warehouse in the industrial district. 3 suspects were expected to meet there, and if everything went according to plan, they'd finally have enough evidence to move forward with arrests. Thursday came and went in a blur. Terrence worked a 16-hour shift. He got home at 2 a.m., slept 4 hours, and was back at the precinct by 7 a.m. Friday arrived. At the precinct, Terrence's sergeant, Mike Rodriguez, noticed him checking his phone for the 10th time that morning. "You good, Bishop?" Rodriguez asked. "Yeah, just drama at home," Terrence said with a tired laugh. "Apparently, my Jeep is a menace to society." "This man." Rodriguez shook his head. "I bought a house specifically to avoid that nonsense." "What are they giving you grief about?" "Parking in guest parking while my garage door's broken. Said they'd tow it today if I don't move it." Rodriguez checked his watch. "It's 11 a.m. You got time to run home and sort it out?" Terrence was about to answer when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Agent Sarah Chin, the FBI agent leading the task force. "Meeting in 5. We're moving up the timeline. Primary suspect is on the move." "Can't," Terrence said, showing Rodriguez the text. "Duty calls. I'll deal with the HOA later." "What are they gonna do, tow a cop's car?" He had no idea how wrong he was. At 4:47 p.m., Diane Whitmore stood in her kitchen, watching the clock. Her husband, Richard, was out of town on business, which meant she had the whole evening to herself. Usually, she'd spend it watching reality TV or scrolling through Facebook, looking for neighborhood gossip to weaponize at the next HOA meeting. But today was special. Today was the day she taught Terrence Bishop a lesson he wouldn't forget. She walked to her garage and pulled out her secret weapon, a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters she'd purchased 2 years ago for exactly this purpose. She'd used them before, 3 times actually, on residents who'd parked bicycles in common areas or chained planters to railings. Each time, she'd waited until they weren't home, cut the locks, and moved the items to the HOA storage unit. The residents always complained, but what could they do? She was following the rules. She was the HOA president. She had the authority. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't just moving something to storage. This time, she was taking the vehicle. At 4:55 p.m., Diane walked out to the guest parking lot. The black Jeep Wrangler sat in spot number 12, exactly where it had been all week. She looked around. The parking lot was empty. Most people were still at work or inside making dinner. Perfect. She approached the Jeep and noticed immediately that Terrence had chained the steering wheel to the brake pedal with a thick chain and padlock. Smart, she thought, but not smart enough. Diane positioned the bolt cutters around the chain. She had to use both hands and all her strength, but after 3 attempts, the chain snapped. The sound made her jump, but when she looked around, nobody was there. Her heart was racing now, adrenaline pumping. This was the most excited she'd felt in months. She tried the door. Locked, obviously. But Diane had prepared for this too. From her pocket, she pulled out a Slim Jim, a tool she'd bought online and watched YouTube videos to learn how to use. She'd practiced on her own car. It took her 7 minutes, but she got the door open. The Jeep's interior was surprisingly clean. A car seat in the back for his daughter. A coffee cup in the holder. Some paperwork on the passenger seat. She shoved the paperwork onto the floor and climbed into the driver's seat. Now came the tricky part. The Jeep had a push-button start, which meant she needed the key fob. She checked the visor, the glove box, under the seats. Nothing. Damn it, she muttered. Then she remembered. Richard had a friend who owned an auto shop, and that friend had once told her that lots of spare keys were hidden in magnetic boxes under vehicles. Diane got out and dropped to her hands and knees, ignoring the dirt on her white tennis skirt. She felt along the undercarriage of the Jeep, and there it was, a small magnetic box stuck to the frame near the driver's side wheel well. Inside was a spare key fob. "Gotcha," she whispered. Diane climbed back into the Jeep, pressed the brake, and pushed the start button. The engine roared to life. She actually laughed out loud. She couldn't believe it was this easy. What Diane didn't see was the body camera. Across the street, parked in an unmarked sedan, Officer Kevin Pham sat watching his phone while waiting for his partner to return from a coffee run. They were on surveillance duty, monitoring a suspect's apartment in the building directly across from Riverside Meadows. The suspect was believed to be receiving shipments of illegal narcotics, and their job was to log everyone who came and went from the building. It was boring work, and Kevin had been watching Netflix on his phone for the past 20 minutes. But his body camera, mounted to his vest and set to continuous recording mode per department policy during task force operations, had captured everything. The sound of the Jeep starting made Kevin look up from his phone. He watched, confused, as a middle-aged white woman in tennis clothes pulled out of the parking lot in a black Jeep Wrangler. "Huh," he said to himself. "Guess Bishop got someone to move his Jeep." But something felt off. Kevin had been a cop for 11 years, and his instincts were usually right. The woman looked nervous, excited even. She kept checking her mirrors, looking around. That wasn't how people normally acted when moving a car. Kevin made a note in his log. 4:58 p.m., white female, approximately 50 to 60 years old, brown/blonde hair, white tennis outfit, drove off in black Jeep Wrangler, license plate 7 Victor, Henry Tango 493. He didn't call it in. At the time, it didn't seem important. He'd mention it to Bishop later. Meanwhile, Diane drove the Jeep 3 blocks away to a public parking lot behind a strip mall. Her plan was simple. She'd leave it here for a few days, let Terrence panic and search for it, and then she'd discover it and report it to him. She'd play the hero, helping him find his stolen vehicle, and in the process, he'd learn that you don't mess with Diane Whitmore's HOA rules. It was petty, sure, but Diane had built her entire life around petty victories. She parked the Jeep in the far corner of the lot, behind a dumpster where it wouldn't be easily noticed. She wiped down the steering wheel and door handles with sanitizing wipes she kept in her purse, then locked the doors and pocketed the key fob. Walking back to Riverside Meadows, Diane felt invincible. She'd pulled it off. And the best part? Terrence couldn't prove anything. She'd made sure to wear gloves when cutting the chain. No fingerprints. No witnesses. Perfect. What she didn't know was that the Jeep contained something that made it one of the most important pieces of evidence in a federal investigation. Terrence got home at 9:47 p.m. The surveillance operation had been a success. They'd photographed all 3 suspects together, recorded conversations that would hold up in court, and were now one step closer to bringing down the entire operation. He was exhausted but satisfied. He parked his assigned police vehicle in his assigned spot and walked toward his unit, already dreaming of a hot shower and sleep. Then he saw the broken chain on the ground in guest parking spot number 12. His blood went cold. "No," he whispered, breaking into a run. "No, no, no." The spot was empty. His Jeep was gone. Terrence spun in a circle, hoping he'd somehow misremembered where he parked it. But no, this was the right spot. The broken chain was right there. Someone had cut it. His first thought was that the HOA had towed it, just like Diane had threatened. But as he picked up the chain and examined it, he realized something was wrong. If a tow company had taken it, they would have left a notice. They would have documented it. This wasn't a tow. This was theft. Terrence pulled out his phone and called Rodriguez. "Sarge, we've got a problem." "What's up?" "Someone stole my Jeep." There was a pause. "Stole it?" From the parking lot at your place. Yeah. Cut through the chain and everything. That's weird, but Bishop, just file a report and wait. Rodriguez's tone changed. Oh no. Please tell me you didn't. Terrence closed his eyes. The evidence logs from last month. The photos. The backup drives. They're all in the lockbox. In your Jeep? In my Jeep. Another pause, longer this time. Bishop, we have a very strict policy about evidence chain of custody. You were supposed to. I know, Terrence said quickly. I know. I was running surveillance 16 hours a day. I didn't have time to drive them to the evidence room across town. I locked them in the fireproof box in my vehicle. I followed protocol for temporary field storage. Temporary field storage means 24 hours, not 2 weeks. I know. Terrence was pacing now, his mind racing. Look, I'll find it. I'll file a report, I'll track it down. The box is locked with a combination lock. Nobody can access it without bolt cutters? Like the one someone just used to steal your Jeep? Rodriguez's voice was sharp now. Get down to the station. We need to report this up the chain. This is bad, Bishop. This is really bad. Terrence drove to the station in his police vehicle, his mind spiraling through worst-case scenarios. The lockbox contained USB drives with surveillance photos, audio recordings from wiretaps, and witness statements. Months of investigation. If those fell into the wrong hands, if the suspects found out what evidence they had, the entire case could fall apart. At the station, Rodriguez was waiting with Agent Chen and 2 other task force members. Explain, Chen said, her arms crossed. She was a woman in her early 40s, with short black hair and a no-nonsense attitude that made everyone in the room straighten their posture when she spoke. Terrence explained everything: the broken garage door, the HOA threats, coming home to find the Jeep gone. So let me get this straight, Chen said slowly. You're telling me that federal evidence in an active investigation was stolen because of a homeowners association dispute? I don't think the two are connected, Terrence said. I think someone saw an opportunity and took it. Could be kids joyriding. Could be someone who... Or, Chen interrupted, it could be that your cover was blown and someone from the drug operation tracked you down and stole evidence that could destroy their entire network. The room went silent. We need to find that Jeep, Chen said. File the theft report. Get the plate out to every unit in the city. I want helicopters, I want patrol cars, I want every officer with eyes looking for that vehicle. Already on it, Rodriguez said, typing on his computer. Putting out the bolo now. For the next 3 hours, Terrence sat in the station, feeling helpless as dozens of officers searched the city for his Jeep. Every 15 minutes, someone would come in with an update. Nothing on the east side, nothing near the airport, negative on the highway. At 1:23 a.m., Terrence's phone rang. It was Officer Pham. Bishop, you're looking for your Jeep, right? The black Wrangler? Yeah, why? Did you see something? Dude, I watched someone steal it. Terrence nearly dropped the phone. What? I was doing surveillance on that apartment across from your complex, remember? For the task force thing? My body cam caught the whole thing. Why didn't you stop them? I didn't know it was being stolen. I thought you'd sent someone to move it. But after I heard about the bolo, I checked my footage. Bishop, you're not gonna believe this. 20 minutes later, Terrence was watching the body camera footage on a computer screen at the station. Rodriguez, Chen, and 4 other officers crowded around. They watched in silence as Diane Whitmore cut the chain, broke into the Jeep, found the spare key, and drove away. Who is that? Chen asked. Terrence leaned closer to the screen, squinting. Then recognition hit him like a punch to the gut. That's Diane Whitmore, he said quietly. She's the president of my HOA. The one who threatened to tow your Jeep? The one who threatened to tow my Jeep. Rodriguez let out a low whistle. So she didn't just have it towed. She straight up stole it herself. That's not an HOA enforcement action, Chen said, her eyes still on the screen. That's grand theft auto. That's breaking and entering. That's tampering with federal evidence. She turned to Terrence. Where does she live? Same complex. Unit 168. Chen smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who just figured out how to solve a very annoying problem. "Gentlemen," she said, "I think it's time we paid Mrs. Whitmore a visit. But first, we need to find that Jeep. Fam, you said you logged the incident." "Yes, ma'am." Noted the time, the clothing description, and I got the direction she drove. "Good. Pull up traffic cameras for the surrounding area. Let's track her route." It took them 47 minutes to track Diane's route through traffic cameras. She'd driven east on Riverside Boulevard, turned onto Hampton Street, and then disappeared into a parking lot behind a strip mall. At 2:15 a.m., 3 patrol cars pulled into the parking lot with their lights off. And there it was in the far corner behind a dumpster, Terrence's black Jeep Wrangler. "Thank God," Terrence breathed, jogging over to it. He tried the door, but he used his spare key to open it and immediately checked under the rear seat. The lockbox was still there, combination lock intact. "Evidence is secure," he called out to the others. "She never opened it." Chen walked over, shaking her head in disbelief. "So she stole a vehicle, hid it in a parking lot, and didn't even check what was inside? What was her plan? Knowing Diane?" Terrence said. "She was probably planning to find it in a few days and play hero. She's done stuff like this before. Cut people's bike locks, moved their property. She gets off on the power trip." "Well," Chen said, pulling out her phone, "her power trip is about to come to a very sudden end. We've got her on camera committing multiple felonies. Rodriguez, have the Jeep processed for prints and then towed to the secure evidence lot. Bishop, go home and get some sleep. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have a very interesting conversation with Mrs. Whitmore." But Terrence shook his head. "With all due respect, Agent Chin, I'd like to be there when you arrest her." Chin considered this. "Normally I'd say no because you're personally involved. But given that she stole your vehicle, tampered with your property, and potentially compromised a federal investigation." She smiled. "Yeah, you can be there. But you don't say a word. This is by the book. Understood?" "Understood." Saturday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine and clear blue skies. At 8:47 a.m., Diane Whitmore was in her kitchen making a smoothie when she heard the doorbell ring. She frowned. Who would be visiting this early on a Saturday? When she opened the door, she found 2 FBI agents, 3 police officers, and Detective Terrence Bishop standing on her doorstep. "Mrs. Diane Whitmore?" Agent Chen asked, holding up her badge. "Yes." Diane's voice was uncertain. She looked past Chen to Terrence, and her eyes widened slightly. "What's going on?" "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI. We need to talk to you about a vehicle theft that occurred yesterday evening." The color drained from Diane's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" Chen pulled out a tablet and turned it around, showing Diane the body camera footage of herself cutting the chain on Terrence's Jeep. "Because we have you on camera stealing Detective Bishop's vehicle." Diane's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I wasn't stealing it. I was enforcing HOA regulations. He was in violation of parking rules. By cutting his lock and driving his vehicle to a different location without his permission or knowledge? Chen's eyebrow raised. "Mrs. Whitmore, that's not enforcement. That's theft. The HOA bylaws give me the authority to." "The HOA bylaws don't give you the authority to commit felonies," Chen interrupted. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're under arrest for grand theft auto, breaking and entering, and tampering with evidence in a federal investigation." "Federal investigation?" Diane's voice rose to a shriek. "What are you talking about? It's just a car." "That car contained evidence related to an ongoing federal drug trafficking investigation," Chen said calmly. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." "This is insane. I was just enforcing the rules. He was violating the parking regulations. Someone has to maintain standards in this community." Diane was backing away now, her voice getting louder and more hysterical. "Do you know how hard I work to keep this neighborhood nice? Do you know how many people try to break the rules? I'm doing everyone a favor." "Ma'am, turn around now," one of the police officers said, stepping forward with handcuffs. Diane looked at Terrence, and for a moment, something ugly crossed her face. "This is because of you," she hissed. "You've been nothing but trouble since you moved in. You don't fit here. You don't belong." "Mrs. Whitmore," Chin said sharply, "I suggest you stop talking. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." Two officers moved forward and gently but firmly turned Diane around, cuffing her hands behind her back. She started crying now, big dramatic sobs. "This isn't fair. I was just doing my job. The HOA board will back me up. We have rules for a reason. You can't arrest me for enforcing the rules." As they led her to the patrol car, neighbors started emerging from their homes. Mrs. Hernandez from Unit 152. The Johnsons from Unit 203. The Patels from Unit 189. One by one, they came out to watch Diane Whitmore, the tyrannical HOA president who'd made their lives miserable for years, get placed in the back of a police car. Terrence stood on Diane's front lawn, watching the scene unfold. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel vindicated. Mostly he just felt tired. Agent Chin walked over to him. "You okay?" "Yeah," Terrence said. "Just processing." "For what it's worth, Bishop, you handled this better than most would have. A lot of people would have lost their cool with someone like her." Terrence nodded. "I learned a long time ago that people like Diane are everywhere. You can't let them get to you. You just have to make sure they face consequences when they cross the line." "Well, she definitely crossed it this time." Chin looked at her watch. "We'll need you to come by the station later to give a full statement. But right now, go home. Spend time with your daughter. This is handled." The story spread through Riverside Meadows like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew that Diane Whitmore had been arrested for stealing Detective Bishop's Jeep. By evening, the local news had picked it up. By Sunday morning, it was trending on social media. The body camera footage, released as part of public record requests, went viral. Millions of people watched Diane cut the chain, break into the Jeep, and drive away with a satisfied smile on her face. The comments were brutal. Karen gets what she deserves. Imagine being so petty you commit federal crimes over a parking spot. The look on her face when she realized she stole a cop's car. Not just a cop working a federal investigation. She picked the wrong one. Monday morning, the Riverside Meadows HOA held an emergency meeting. The vice president, a quiet man named Leonard Russo who'd always been overshadowed by Diane, called the meeting to order. "Given recent events," Leonard said carefully, "the board has voted unanimously to remove Diane Whitmore as HOA president and from the board entirely. We're also implementing new policies to prevent abuse of power and to provide more reasonable enforcement procedures." The room erupted in applause. "Additionally," Leonard continued, "we want to formally apologize to Detective Bishop. The way this situation was handled was completely unacceptable. We're also refunding any fines he may have paid and offering to cover the cost of his garage door repair." More applause. Terrence, sitting in the back with Zoe on his lap, raised his hand. "I appreciate that, but I don't need the repairs covered. What I would like is for the HOA to implement a grace period policy for maintenance issues. Sometimes life happens. Sometimes people are dealing with emergencies or work obligations. A little understanding goes a long way." "Agreed," Leonard said, nodding vigorously. "We'll draft that policy this week." After the meeting, neighbors who'd never spoken to Terrence before came up to shake his hand and apologize. Mrs. Hernandez, an elderly woman from Unit 152, had tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Diane gave me a violation notice last year because my granddaughter's bike was on my patio. She made me pay a $200 fine. I was too scared to fight it. Watching her get arrested, I know I shouldn't feel happy about someone else's misfortune, but I do." "You're allowed to feel relieved," Terrence said gently. "She made a lot of people's lives harder than they needed to be." The Patels invited him to dinner. The Johnsons offered to babysit Zoe anytime he needed. The community, freed from Diane's iron grip, was finally starting to feel like an actual community. Diane Whitmore's trial took place 3 months later. She'd been charged with grand theft auto, breaking and entering, and interfering with a law enforcement investigation. Her lawyer, a public defender named Martin Hayes, had tried to argue that she'd believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president. The jury didn't buy it. The prosecution presented the body camera footage, Officer Pham's testimony, and documentation showing that Diane had been specifically warned multiple times that HOA authority did not extend to removing or relocating residents' vehicles without following proper legal procedures. They also presented testimony from 6 other residents who'd had property stolen or damaged by Diane over the years. The pattern was clear. Diane had been abusing her position for a long time, and she'd finally gone too far. On the stand, Diane tried to play the victim. She cried. She claimed she was just trying to maintain community standards. She insisted that she'd never intended to permanently steal the Jeep, just teach Terrence a lesson. During cross-examination, the prosecutor asked her a simple question: "Mrs. Whitmore, did you have permission from Detective Bishop to take his vehicle?" "No, but..." "Yes or no, please." "No." "Did you inform Detective Bishop that you were taking his vehicle?" "No, but the HOA bylaws." "Yes or no?" "No." "Did you use bolt cutters to break a lock that did not belong to you?" Diane's jaw tightened. "Yes." "Did you use tools to break into a vehicle that did not belong to you?" "Yes." "Did you drive that vehicle to a location where you hid it?" "I didn't hide it. You parked it behind a dumpster in a corner of a parking lot 3 blocks away. Would you characterize that as hiding it?" Diane didn't answer. "Mrs. Whitmore, regardless of your intentions, you took someone else's property without permission, broke into it, and concealed its location. Under what definition is that not theft?" The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Diane to 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, and 500 hours of community service. She was also ordered to pay restitution to Terrence for damages, legal fees, and emotional distress. But perhaps the most devastating consequence for Diane was the public humiliation. The case had become a national story, a cautionary tale about HOA power trips gone wrong. Her name was forever associated with entitlement, theft, and spectacular failure. 6 months after Diane's conviction, Terrence stood in his garage, pressing the button on his brand new garage door opener. The door rose smoothly, no grinding, no sticking. Perfect. Zoe ran up beside him, bouncing with excitement. "Can we go camping this weekend, Daddy? Please?" "Maybe," Terrence said, ruffling her hair. "I have to check the schedule. But I think we can make it work." The past few months had been transformative for Riverside Meadows. With Diane gone and Leonard leading the HOA with a much gentler hand, the community had relaxed. People actually talked to each other now. There were impromptu barbecues. Kids played in the common areas without fear of violation notices. The federal drug investigation had concluded successfully too. With the evidence from Terrence's Jeep intact, they'd arrested 17 people across 3 states and shut down a major trafficking operation. Agent Chen had commended Terrence for his work and his composure throughout the entire ordeal with Diane. As for Diane herself, she was serving her sentence at a minimum security facility about 90 miles away. Terrence had heard through the grapevine that she'd become deeply unpopular there too, trying to enforce rules among her fellow inmates and generally making everyone's life harder. Some people never learn. Terrence's phone buzzed. It was a text from Mrs. Hernandez. "Made extra tamales. Want some?" He smiled and texted back, "Yes, please. Be there in 10. "Come on, Zoe," he said. "Mrs. Hernandez made tamales." "Yes." Zoe pumped her fist in the air. "Can I bring some to share at school tomorrow?" "We'll ask her." As they walked across the parking lot toward Mrs. Hernandez's unit, Terrence noticed something. Guest parking spot number 12, the spot where this whole thing had started, was occupied by a visitor's car. Nobody had left a violation notice. Nobody was measuring how long it had been there. Nobody cared. It was just a parking spot. The way it should have been all along. Later that evening, after Zoe had gone to bed with a belly full of tamales, Terrence sat on his back patio with a beer, looking up at the stars. His phone rang. It was Rodriguez. "Hey, Bishop. Just wanted to check in. How you doing?" "Good, Sarge. Really good actually." "Glad to hear it. You know, I've been thinking about that whole situation with the HOA lady. It's kind of crazy how things worked out. Yeah, Terrence said. If she just followed normal procedures, filed complaints, worked with a towing company, done things the legal way, she probably would have gotten my Jeep towed and I would have just paid the fine and dealt with it. But she had to take it into her own hands. She had to take it into her own hands, Terrence agreed. And in doing so, she committed multiple felonies and destroyed her own life. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. You think she ever understood why what she did was wrong? Terrence thought about that. Honestly? Probably not. People like Diane, they're so convinced of their own righteousness that they can't see when they've crossed the line. In her mind, she was the hero of the story. She was maintaining order. Everyone else was the problem. That's sad, man. It is, Terrence said. But it's also a choice. She chose to abuse what little power she had. She chose to make people's lives harder instead of easier. She chose to steal my Jeep instead of working with me to solve the problem. Every step of the way, she had options, and she chose the worst one. Well, at least the community's better off now. It is. Leonard's doing a great job. People are actually happy here now. It's nice. After they hung up, Terrence sat for a while longer, thinking about everything that had happened. The whole ordeal had taught him something important. Power, even the small amount of power that comes with being an HOA president, can corrupt people if they're not careful. Diane had let it go to her head, and it had cost her everything. But it had also taught him something else. Communities work best when people show each other grace. When they communicate. When they remember that everyone's fighting their own battles, dealing with their own problems. His garage door had been broken. It was a temporary inconvenience. If Diane had just talked to him like a human being, they could have worked something out. Instead, she'd seen it as an opportunity to exert dominance. And that choice had changed everything. 3 years later, Terrence still lived in Riverside Meadows. Zoe was now in 5th grade and thriving. The community had continued to evolve into a genuinely pleasant place to live. Leonard had served his term as HOA president and passed the torch to Mrs. Patel, who ran things with kindness and common sense. Diane had been released from prison after serving 13 months. She'd moved to another state, and as far as anyone knew, she stayed far away from any homeowners associations. Her husband had divorced her during her incarceration, and she'd lost most of her friends when the full extent of her behavior became public. The story of Echa Karen versus the police detective had become something of an urban legend in law enforcement circles. Rookies were told the tale as a cautionary example of how civilians could unintentionally interfere with investigations. HOA management companies used it in training seminars about the limits of their authority. And on social media, the body camera footage still circulated every few months, always with the same comments: play stupid games, win stupid prizes. This is what happens when Karens think they're above the law. Imagine going to federal prison over a parking spot. But for Terrence, the story wasn't about schadenfreude or viral videos. It was about something simpler and more profound: respect, communication, and the importance of treating people with basic human decency. One Saturday afternoon, Terrence and Zoe were loading camping gear into his Jeep, the same Jeep that had started it all, when a new family moved into Unit 247, right next door. The father, a tired-looking man in his 30s, was unloading boxes from a moving truck. His car was parked in guest parking. Terrence walked over and extended his hand. "Hey, I'm Terrence. Welcome to Riverside Meadows." "Thanks," the man said, shaking his hand. "I'm David. Just moved in from across town." "Nice to meet you, David. Listen, I don't know if anyone mentioned it, but there's a HOA here. Pretty reasonable these days. If you ever have any issues or questions about the rules, just let me know. Or talk to Mrs. Patel, the president. She's great." David looked relieved. "Thanks, man. I was actually worried about that. I've heard horror stories about HOAs." Terrence smiled. "Yeah, we had some issues a few years back, but it's all good now. We look out for each other here. That's what neighbors are supposed to do." As Terrence walked back to his Jeep, Zoe looked up at him. "Daddy, why did you help that man? You don't even know him." "That's exactly why," Terrence said, lifting her into the vehicle. Because when someone's new and doesn't know anyone, that's when they need help the most. And because I remember what it's like to have neighbors who don't help you. I'd rather be the other kind. The good kind. The good kind. They drove off toward the mountains, leaving riverside meadows behind them. In his rearview mirror, Terrence could see David directing the movers, settling into his new home, welcomed by a community that had learned valuable lessons about power, humility, and the simple act of being decent to one another. And somewhere, in another state, Diane Whitmore was learning those same lessons the hard way. So what's the moral of this story? What can we learn from the saga of Diane Whitmore and her catastrophic parking spot crusade? First, power corrupts, especially small power. When people get even a tiny amount of authority, they have to resist the urge to abuse it. HOA boards, middle management, mall cops. Whenever someone has just enough power to make life hard for others, there's a temptation to use it. The truly good people resist that temptation. Second, communication solves most problems. If Diane had talked to Terrence, really talked to him, they could have worked something out. A temporary parking arrangement, a deadline extension, something. But she didn't want to solve the problem. She wanted to win. And in trying to win, she lost everything. Third, breaking the law is breaking the law, no matter your intentions. Diane genuinely believed she was in the right. She thought HOA bylaws gave her authority that they didn't. She thought being a president of a homeowners association put her above the rules everyone else follows. She was wrong. And that mistake cost her 18 months of her life, her marriage, her reputation, and her freedom. Finally, treat people the way you want to be treated. It's the oldest rule in the book, and it's still the most important one. Terrence could have been vindictive. He could have gloated. He could have made Diane's life even harder during the trial. But he didn't. He treated her like a person who made terrible choices, not like an enemy to destroy. And in the end, isn't that what separates us from people like Diane? The choice to be kind even when we have every reason not to be? Think about that next time you have a little bit of power over someone else. Think about how you'd want to be treated. And maybe, just maybe, we can all avoid becoming the next viral HOA Karen. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe for more wild tales of justice served, and drop a comment below telling me about your craziest HOA experience. Trust me, I want to hear them. Until next time, remember, be kind to your neighbors, follow the law, and for the love of everything holy, don't steal a cop's car. Peace out.